You are Locked On Falcons POSTCAST, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Falcons POSTCAST, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra and Batiste. Alongside me is Aaron Freeman, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, our Locked On Falcons POSTCAST is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Falcons were looking for their fourth division win of the season, and they got it. They went down to Tampa and snatched a win right away from the Buccaneers. So let's just get right into it, because Kirk Cousins was absolutely cooking in this Falcons 31-26 win today, Aaron. He seemed like he was in a zone once again. I mean, it was almost like he was picking up where he left off in those last two quarters against the Bucs about 10 days ago when they played here in Atlanta. And it was just really good to see, because it was one of those games where unfortunately the ground game didn't, the rush game didn't set up the pass game. It was kind of vice versa. But what I liked about it was the fact that we saw Kirk get at it sooner than we did in that last game. 14-20 for 224 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, and 146.7 passer rating at halftime. So for you, Free, how important was it for the passing game to get going early, especially because sometimes we talk about the Falcons getting a slow start?
Yeah, I think it was really important for this game in particular. We'll talk about the defense later, because the defense needed all the help they could get to basically shut down this Bucs run defense. And getting that lead, I think, really helped allow the Falcons to force the Bucs to play a little bit more one-dimensional than they would have liked to. And you needed kind of a big lift from Kirk Cousins on this day, being able to distribute the ball as we've seen a number of times now. It feels like both of Kirk's best games have come against this Bucs team and this Todd Bowles defense. So if we can just get Todd Bowles every single week, I think this Falcons offense is going to be fine. But no, all that to say, the thing that was the biggest standout for Kirk was late in the game. They needed him, Kirk wheels.
Yes, they needed Kirk-o wheels. Yeah.
First downs, getting a QB sneak conversion. Probably the only 2 times we'll see that the whole year, but the Falcons needed it this week, and Kirk basically was able to dig deep this week and not just do it through the air, but also on the ground.
And I really like that you brought that out, because, sometimes we malign him a lot for the fact that he is a bit of a statue. And the reality is, and this was, I think, his second longest run, right? His longest run was 21 yards in a game against the Cardinals some years ago. But yeah, for him to be able to just go 13 yards at a moment in time where everybody in that stadium probably thought that ball was going to be passed off to a running back or, something, maybe a pass play, but never in a million years would you have thought that was the play. So also, I like the fact that for the most part, we saw some really good play calling from Zach Robinson as well. I love that play call, and really thought that was one of those moments where I said, yeah, the defense isn't doing its job today like we want them to. And certainly we don't necessarily want to put the ball back in their hands, if you will, meaning, the defense and the Bucs having the ball back in their hands. But ultimately, one of the reasons that they were pushed to their limits, forced to give up all their timeouts, and really kind of just ran out of time, if you will, to kind of make a comeback, was because Kirk Cousins with that kind of heads up play. And I think that goes back to that veteran presence that we're talking about, right? Making those right decisions in those moments and just knowing what's at stake, which is, again, not just going 4-0 at the top of the division, but you've now beaten your fiercest competitor, really your only competitor in the division. You've now beaten them twice. So when we talk about head-to-head matchups or anything in the way of a tiebreaker, this team has absolutely put themselves in position for that. And yeah, I think, like you said, what a finale to Kirk-tober. I mean, you couldn't have scripted it any better than this for him, because, I mean, he came to play. He literally 4 touchdowns across that entire game and only a couple sacks. And we're going to talk about why that happened only twice in this game in a few minutes. But also, we saw a really standout game from Kyle Pitts. Now, granted, that was despite the boneheaded play that almost cost the Falcons a score. And I don't know about you, Free, but sometimes I kind of take a second in a game and I start looking at the tweets just because some of them are hilarious. And my Twitter feed blew up at that moment. Even the radio broadcasters were like, yeah, they're calling that back. And all of a sudden they say the ruling on the field is confirmed, and you hear a collective sigh across all of Atlanta and certainly, on the Falcons sidelines, if you will. But it was really still, other than that, to me, almost like a career day for Kyle Pitts. 4 receptions, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better day for Kyle Pitts on National Tight Ends Day that we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, KP did his thing today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago in the postcast where it's like you'll get a great Kyle Pitts play and then you'll get a really boneheaded Kyle Pitts
yes.
play. It seems like, and I was joking with the Locked On Falcons insiders, like Kyle Pitts giveth, Kyle Pitts take it away.
Take it away.
They got lucky. They got so lucky because as they explained on the broadcast, the only reason I don't think that was called a fumble and a touchback was because they did not have an angle down the sideline to see it clearly, so they couldn't have enough evidence to overturn it.
Yep.
Like again, we had the same conversation last year with a certain quarterback in Antoine Winfield, and we talked about what would Antoine Winfield do coming back from the Bucs. He's gonna get him a game-changing play, and he nearly had one, and everybody breathed a sigh of relief. And I was just sitting there, just like, Kyle, what are you doing? You made the best catch and run of your entire career, and to just let your foot off the gas, especially with that guy creeping up behind you, it was like, oh, the Falcons got so lucky, and But you're right. It was outside of that 1 second of that one play. It was a great day for Kyle Pitts, especially on National Tight Ends Day. So we wanted to see him get going against this Bucs team, we saw a couple of weeks ago, and he's been outstanding over this last month. With the exception of 1 or 2 boneheaded plays, but hey, I don't know what else to say. It's like Kyle Pitts giveth it, Kyle Pitts take it away. So I'll take the give at this point in time rather than take at this point.
Yeah, I got to agree with you on that one. It's one of those things where it's like 8's going to 8. I mean, we know at some point he's going to do that. But on the flip side, kind of a colloquialism, he actually ate in a good way for the rest of the game. So we'll give him his little credit. We'll give him his props. And we'll just know that just about each and every game, we have to be prepared for one of these shaking your head moments with Kyle Pitts. And then as long as he resets himself and he makes some good plays down the stretch, it's all good. And for me, I think also you kind of look at a group that you kind of wondered what was going to happen with that offensive line, this week, right? Because you're thinking to yourself, a little bit banged up. You're not quite sure what you're going to get. And then, of course, we talked about, as you just mentioned, by the way, a depleted defense overall from the Bucs in the last game. You get a Kalijah Kancey back. You get an Antoine Winfield Jr. back. So now you've got kind of a holistic piece. And, of course, Vita Vea is going to be Vita Vea. But I thought this O-line, particularly when Chris Lindstrom went down and Kyle Hinton had to pick up the slack, I felt like they really did do a fine job of making sure that they kept Kirk Cousins upright, only 2 sacks on the day. And hey, look, we'll take that, if you will. And also, when they needed it most, that run game finally started to pick up in the second half. In fact, I thought this was a hilarious thing. And I know we're talking about the O-line, but again, I said, I'm going to use this from now on. On the radio broadcast, they call Tyler Algier the bowling ball, razor head bowling ball. I don't even know what you have to do with that, but of course, meaning when he gets the ball, it's just straight ahead and he's just going to cut through and slice through. But I felt like Tyler Algier, Bijan Robinson, they had those strong running games. They had, when you needed to get a yard, they got you the yard. When you needed to get a few extra yards out there, like I think there was one play where they only needed 1, they got 10 from Tyler Algier. But I do want to recognize the offensive line for giving the Falcons those key moments and giving those critical moments for Kirk Cousins to, I think when he checked down, it ended up Bijan Robinson. It was like he was the 4th choice for Kirk Cousins. And you get to do that when your O-line is playing at the level we saw for the Falcons today.
Yeah, definitely. They deserve a lot of credit. As you stated, a couple sort of standout plays for Vita Vea, maybe late in the game, but when Chris Lindstrom went down midway through the third quarter, I was like, oh crap.
Me too. Yeah.
This might be a problem. And it wasn't that much of a problem. And Kyle Hinton has been a player that I have dragged on Locked On Falcons over the last year. And kudos to him for stepping up when he needed to replace the Falcons, best offensive line, or arguably their best offensive line, depending on where you feel about Jake Matthews. But, I think that you got to give some credit to the offensive line for holding it down. And they have consistently given Kirk's limitations, right?
Yes.
They have consistently been giving him time each and every week especially over the last month, to be able to locate some of those weapons that you're talking about. So offensive line definitely stepped up, especially, they were already kind of beat up going into this game, and now down a man and arguably their best player. They were able to step up big time.
Exactly. And you think about the fact that this is when we talk about depth, right? And we talk about some of the players that have been brought back to this Falcons team in the last couple of weeks. And you look at a guy like Kyle Hinton and you say to yourself, this is why you have that depth, someone who's familiar with this offense. And when his number's called, he's ready to rock and roll. And I think that's what we're able to see, because like you said, again, a collective gasp, because I would say Chris Lindstrom is their best O lineman and really the best, or some would say even second best, if not first best at his position in the entirety of the league. So yeah, for that O-line and Kyle Hinton to hold it together, I think kudos to them for being able to do that. But speaking of holding it together, I don't know. This defense had an Oreo type of day. We will explain when we come back in the deep dive. So think about this. You're at a position or a situation where you absolutely have to hire talent, but you're overwhelmed as a company and you don't know how you're going to get it done. That is when LinkedIn becomes your new BFF, because LinkedIn helps so many businesses, especially small businesses, to be able to get the job done when they need to get it done most. And if you think about it, it's not just one or two businesses. We're talking 2.5 million businesses that utilize LinkedIn, because it's not just a job board. It helps you to hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but maybe are open to the perfect role. And in any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you are looking in the wrong place. So you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Now, terms and conditions do apply, but again, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on linkedin.com. This episode of our Locked On Falcons postcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members, billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. And get this, you can win up to 100% your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And you can get in on the best way to get action in sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Texas, and right here in Georgia. And Prize Picks puts their members first. So all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when your pick hits, you can get your money in as quick as 15 minutes. So, hey, just think, if you actually had an opportunity to get on Prize Picks and you had the Falcons in mind, you probably have that money to be able to go and get yourself a great meal and celebrate the Falcons win over the Bucs. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup at Prize Picks. Again, download that Prize Picks app, use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It is highly encouraged that you go to Prize Picks, from us to you, because Prize Picks run your game. So, Aaron, I decided to coin a different term because I know that people probably feel some type of way at this point about us saying bend, don't break, especially because last week that defense straight up broke for the Falcons. So I kind of coined a new term, Oreo, if you will, because good news is the Falcons have remained undefeated on the road this season with this 31-26 win over the Bucs today. And that was kind of in spite of that defense playing an Oreo type of game. But let's start with the positive. And the reason we call it an Oreo game is because, think about it. If you like that cookie, you know that the inside is kind of supposed to be the best part, but then some people might say the outside is the best part. So we're going to go with the good things that happen in the beginning or at the outside or onset of the game. And when you think about that, it's none other than Jessie Bates. I feel like we're always having a conversation about him in the key moments or him setting the tone. And once again, he had a forced fumble, and that was just 2 plays into the game. So, Aaron, how important was that for him to be able to set that tone for the Falcons to then go down the field for a score?
Yeah, basically the Falcons stole 7 points thanks to Jessie Bates.
Yep.
Shout out to Kyle Pitts for making the catch, but the Falcons needed 4 downs to get to that point on offense. And so you don't get that opportunity without Jessie Bates making that play. And so basically Jessie Bates is primarily responsible for the Falcons getting that first 7 points, that first touchdown. Because otherwise, again, we only have 2 plays to judge, but then we have the second drive to judge even further. It didn't seem like the Falcons defense was gearing up to stop the Bucs from moving the football against them. And so for Jessie Bates to go in there and punch the ball out of Rachaad White, I think he had the fumble at the end of the Bucs game last time on, I think it was Bucky Irvin that time, to sort of stop the Bucs momentum there. And so, he just is in these Bucs running backs' heads, just, basically doing the Peanut Tillman punch every single time he gets an opportunity to force a fumble. And, it came up huge for the Falcons.
Oh, yeah. And I think you make a great point, because I think he lives rent-free in their heads as well. And, of course, he has 5 critical tackles and a pass defense, too. And, yeah, I think the way that Jessie Bates plays, it's almost like the boogeyman, or like that ghost that is kind of like you're looking over your shoulder and lo and behold, there he is. But it was one of those things where you absolutely needed to have that. And I think you needed to have that in the beginning of the game, because look how close this game came down to the wire, unfortunately, with Younghoe Koo missing a field goal, which is uncharacteristic of him, but you couldn't get out of Tampa without some drama, right? So that's just kind of, how it is. And speaking of not being able to get out of Tampa, without some drama, granted, I want to say this as well, just to kind of give this defense credit before we kind of talk about who got under our skin a little bit, at least Atlanta. I always say, I think Jimmy Lake does a pretty decent job of kind of making adjustments at halftime. And you do have to give this Falcons defense credit for at least being able to hold Tampa to 0 points in the third quarter.
Yes, they got, essentially 3 turnovers. They got an interception from Jessie Bates. They got an interception from AJ Terrell. And speaking of Oreo, sandwich in between that, you got a turnover on downs off of a fake punt, where, Kadero Hodge made a great play on special teams to blow up that particular play. And so getting those 3 consecutive stops was huge. I was joking with the Locked On Falcons insiders, once the Falcons had gone up 31-17 at the end of the third quarter, I was like, the Bucs are still going to get 2 more scores. This guy,
absolutely,
going to make it a game, right? Because basically you can count on Jimmy Lake's defense in the second half to get 2 or 3 stops at some point. They got them all at the beginning of the second half, and so it was like, okay, they're probably not going to get any more stops for the rest of the game. So they kind of blew their wad, I guess you could say, in the third quarter with the defense getting those stops, and that proved critical for them in the end. So it's like they're going to get some stops in the second half. It's just a question of when they get them, at what point in the game. And, far too often it's been, the final 4 minutes of the fourth quarter or whatever. And it's just all the drama, but they got them early. So it just built up that little expectation. The Falcons got this. They're up 14 with a quarter left in the game. It's like, this no. For as long as you guys think it's going to hold. But that gets to the whole bend but don't break Oreo style defense that we're talking about. It's just like, they're not going to stop you every time. They'll get just enough to get the win. That's basically it.
Exactly. And thank goodness the offense, despite the Younghoe Koo miss, at least there was only 1 minute and 1 second on the board. So that also kind of put the Bucs in a crunch situation, so that the Falcons kind of knew, okay, really all they can do is kind of pass at this point. So that makes it a little bit easier for them to kind of defend. And we'll come back to AJ Terrell, because we're going to end on a positive note. We promise. We'll come back to AJ Terrell in a second. But lo and behold, like you said, that defense in the fourth quarter, that was a part of the reason that it was made a game. Now, granted, you get the 2 points because of the touchback and the safety, but I'm talking about that 7 points. And that drive was another one of those where it's like, okay, here we go. What's about to happen, especially because we're looking at this from the perspective of, all right, like you said, this team, and I think you make a great point. This team typically comes up with those 3 or 4 plays that make us take a collective sigh of relief in the fourth quarter. We don't typically see that in the third quarter. So like you, I was wondering oh my, what's going to happen? But ultimately speaking, somehow, some way, they were able to get it done. But I still want to go back to, but it's your fault in large part that it came to that defense.
It was, right? You talk about that opening drive where the Bucs, I think, had the ball for
9 minutes. Yeah.
Opening drive. And basically, I think I looked at the stats, and the Bucs ran it 9 times on a 15-play drive.
Yes.
And they were able to pretty much get like 5 yards a pop every single time they were running it. And so that was one of the things leading into this game that I was concerned with, where I think a lot of people went into this game like, oh, there's no Godwin, there's no Mike Evans, this Bucs offense has nothing. And it's like, I don't know if you guys can watch the Falcons defense, because they can't stop the run. And so you lose Godwin and Evans. And so that basically means the Bucs are going to lean on their run game. And at least in the early going of this game, it was effective and helped the Bucs keep moving the ball down the field. We talk about, this defense, uncharacteristically last week, giving up a lot of explosive plays. That has been not something that they do, but they will, you can dink and dunk all day on this defense. Yeah. And their goal is eventually you will make a mistake and will capitalize it. Jessie Bates or somebody else might make a play to capitalize on it, but you can move the ball effectively against this defense. So to me, that was the concern going into this game of, hey, this Bucs team is going to be able to find success moving the football against this defense. Just a question of, will they be able to convert in the red zone? Will the Falcons be able to generate turnovers that will lead to some of these stops? And we saw for the most part in this game, whether at the beginning or the end of the game, that the Bucs were able to accomplish that. And that was the thing that was so frustrating, because it was like, the same old Falcons defense is just, bend but don't break. They're gonna give up yards, a whole bunch of them. And so, fortunately for the Falcons, they proved to be opportunistic, and instead of, getting those stops in the red zone, they were getting those stops on turnovers and whatnot. And that proved to be the difference in why they were able to win this game. But there's not a whole lot they do defensively that makes you go like, oh, they can throw a wrench into your plans, other than just, hey, Jessie, hey, AJ, hey, somebody make a play on the back end.
Yeah. And it was especially scary. You mentioned it earlier, to watch it in the first quarter, because we're talking about 60 yards on the ground in the first quarter off 13 carries. So like you said, you're actually north of 5 yards a carry, and you're thinking, whoa, this is going to be a long day. And again, good news is the Falcons didn't allow much more after that, because ultimately it was 9 carries for like 42 yards the rest of the way. So, okay, you kind of stopped it, but I do agree with you. I think the scary part is that it's so leaky. And the scary part is you never quite know when at the end of a game that could come back to haunt you. It was just in this particular case. And maybe also there were times when the Bucs were in a situation where they had to pass. So that probably helped out as well. And real quick before we wrap up, just again want to give AJ Terrell like a shout out, because like we said about Kyle Pitts, I mean, it's really starting to come together for him this season. And we were talking about the fact just a couple of weeks ago that after 2.5 years, AJ Terrell finally had a pick. And now we're talking about AJ Terrell having 2 picks in one game. And also we're talking about that conversation 2 out of the last 3 games. So hopefully that means he's on the upturn as well.
Yes. Yeah. The haters are furious is basically what I'll say. AJ's, it's been up and down this season. Certainly, I'm sure AJ was probably the player that had the freshest night's sleep, knowing that Mike Evans wasn't going to play in this game. So
right.
He was ready to go and took advantage of those opportunities. And so, we love to see it for AJ Terrell. 2 interceptions in what, 1 month after 0 interceptions in 2 years. So, we will absolutely take what we can get. And, at least this will quiet down the AJ Terrell haters for at least another week.
Exactly. And yes, check that. 2 interceptions in 3 games, 1 including today. So yeah, hopefully AJ Terrell is on the come up. But you know what? It's not on the come up. Probably those uniforms that the other team wore today. But we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about some national recognition for some of the guys who hit the field today in What's Next. This episode of our Locked On Falcons postcast is brought to you by Game Time, which has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They also have something called Priority Game Time Picks, so you can curate sports, concert, comedy, theater, etc. in terms of figuring out where you're going to sit and how to save. And speaking of sitting, they have seat views where you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and a lowest price guarantee that will guarantee crediting you 10% of the difference if you find a better price on a ticket. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download that Game Time app today, right after you finish watching Locked On Falcons postcast, because what time is it? It is game time. So typically we have our conversation about which uniforms we like and which uniforms we don't like with the Falcons. But to me, there's always commentary about the Buccaneers as well, as especially when they go into the creamsicle units, which they had on today. So what do you really think about those creamsicle uniforms? Like, are you cool with it because it's nostalgic, or does it just really get under your skin like it does for a lot of people?
I have nostalgia for it because that's what the uniforms they had when I first started watching football. But like, to me, it is not something that like I want to see them wearing, for a full season or anything like that. Like a couple of games sprinkled in, right. Get some division rivals, put them on for the Falcons, put them on for the Saints or whoever else.
Mm-hmm.
And okay. Like, yeah, that makes sense to me. But outside of that, like, I like them, they're a nice, change up, I guess you could say, to what the Bucs usually do. But it's mostly nostalgia that's fueling it, not necessarily because like this is God's gift to football fashion or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, and I can remember working in Tampa and kind of asking like the old heads their thoughts on them, and of course they love them because that's when they played the game for the Buccaneers. But yeah, ultimately I know for me, having worked down there, I'm like, but your pewter uniforms are actually pretty cool, the pewter bottoms. So I don't know, I kind of like those, and I'm like, yeah, you can kind of bring out the creamsicles maybe once or twice a year, but after that, that is it. And we did mention that there is a National Recognition Day today, and it's actually National Tight Ends Day. So through the first half of today's game, there were 3 of 6 touchdowns that were scored by the tight ends today. Of course, that's Kyle Pitts and Cade Otton, and that was across the entirety of the league. 3 of those 6 touchdowns in the first half for tight ends were in this game that we saw against the Falcons and the Bucs today. So I know we talked about Kyle Pitts' performance today and what we kind of thought about that. So let me ask you this question, just in general, favorite tight end ever, whether that's a Falcon or otherwise.
Well, if we're just keeping it to Falcons, like
you can go otherwise. I'm opening it up.
I mean, if I'm going all time, I kind of love Gronk. Just the
you do.
Like he's like, I know he played for that team that no one likes.
Right.
But he was fun on that team, and just watching him do all the things that he did. But if we're just going Falcons, it's a toss-up to me because obviously Tony Gonzalez is the GOAT and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But because Algie Crumpler was like the first good tight end I watched when I was a Falcon fan, because like in the 90s when they were running a run and shoot offense, they didn't have any tight ends, outside of like OJ Santiago or whatever. And so it was Algie was like the first, like, oh, this is what a good tight end looks like. And so I have that soft spot for Algie. Like, love Tony, loved everything that he's about, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But definitely Algie's is if Tony's 1A, then Algie's 1B or flip it or whatever.
Yeah, I like that too. I would have to go with that as my flip. 1A would be, well, no, it would be the same as yours because my 1A would be Algie Crumpler, and then my 1B would be Tony Gonzalez. And it may be a little bit also because when I think Falcons, I think Algie Crumpler, but you could legitimately say you think Falcons are what, Chiefs, if you think about Tony Gonzalez. And again, that's no shade to him, by the way, but just saying when I think tight end and who like literally kind of set the pattern for the Falcons, it's Algie Crumpler. What about overall? Like if you think about the best tight end ever in the history of the NFL for you, who would that be?
Well, I think Shannon Sharpe does not get enough love nowadays. Yeah. How he kind of changed the tight end picture even before Tony Gonzalez did, where basically you were just a big wide receiver and like you could just do whatever you wanted to do. And so I feel like Shannon, he gets recognized, for all the stuff he does post career and all that stuff. But I don't think people really appreciate how good a football player he was in his prime, that he's just as good as anybody else that you could put in that conversation for the greatest of all time, whether that's Gronk, whether that's Tony, whether that's, Kellen Winslow, whether that's, Travis Kelce or any of those guys. I think Shannon Sharpe deserves to be in that conversation on the Mount Rushmore of all-time tight ends.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, Free, because I was just Googling just to kind of see what others said. And so many of them, like you said, had him in, like, if it was a top 10 or a top 15, if you will, or even a top 20, he was in like 15 to 20 or 10 to 15, but never in that top 10 conversation of tight ends. And I'm thinking, but what other tight end do you know has numbers like he does and was able to impact the game the way he did for 2 teams to help them get Super Bowl rings? And so, yeah, I think that he is probably one of those more underrated ones. And I got to throw in, like you did, Kellen Winslow. That was my aunt's God rest her soul, that was her favorite. There will never be anyone better than Kellen Winslow, in her opinion. He was another one who continued to kind of evolve the game, as you mentioned. But yeah, I like what I see out of Travis Kelce, and I think we'll be having a conversation about him kind of being in that GOAT 1, 2, 3, if you will. And I liked the Gronkowski I saw in Tampa, because I felt like that was his time to stick it to the man up in New England. Anyway, thanks to our everydayers for making the Locked On Falcons postcast your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by the Atlanta Football Party for your second listen, and be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're also free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you next time.